So this is a bit of a personal talk, not about my sort of design practice. And I can talk about running for hours and hours. So I've tried to get, I think I got this down to about 10 minutes. So it'll cut into the time a little bit for questions, but we should get through it. So a little bit of framing, and then I want to take you on a virtual trail run with me. And we tested this out and it should work okay. So what do I mean by ultra running? Basically, ultra running is any distance beyond a marathon. What I like to do is typically 50-mile trail races or 100-mile trail races. So that's basically 2 or 4 consecutive marathons in a row on sort of mountain trails. And I could show you pictures like this of me crossing a river at mile 80 of my first 100-miler, or running through the wilderness, sort of just self-propelled by human power, or climbing mountains with sort of epic views behind it. But that doesn't really get at the whole picture of what this is all about. There's a saying in ultra running that you live a whole life in a single day. And life isn't just about the highs, it's also about the lows. So most of the time, the trail running looks like this, right? Endless miles of rocks and roots, or in the middle of the night trying to cram down some food and stay awake and stay warm before I have to get up and start moving again. But to me, that's what makes it all meaningful, right? It's not this pursuit of happiness, but for me in life, it's a pursuit of meaning, and meaning doesn't come from just the happy moments in life. I think that's a false intuition that we have, and that we really should seek meaningful experiences, and that meaningful experience becomes essentially an engine for happiness. And for me, this is a picture of me finishing a 100-mile race last September. My wife hates this picture, but for me, I find this a picture of transformation and growth and contentment and peace and stillness and safety and accomplishment. And so for me, when I see this picture, I'm reminded of all of the things that I went through to get here, not just that it looks like someone who's not having the best day. But all of these experiences are also sort of stimulus for a creative outlet. So I create these posters of all of my experiences, adventures and races, or just sort of adventure runs. And they're a reminder of my connection to the natural world that I've traveled through. They're a reminder and a provocation to get back out into the world, to get out of my house and to experience these things again and not get complacent with sort of everyday life. So that's a little bit of framing. I want to switch gears now and sort of take you on a run with me. So let's see how this works. Share new here, share, and we'll get this started. Okay, so this is a local trail in West Michigan that I run all the time. And I want to tell a few stories, right? Because that's what we do when we're out running, is we tell stories to each other. So I only started running 5 or 6 years ago, and started ultra running 3 or 4 years ago. And when I first started running, I probably hadn't run more than a 5K at any given time. And so I was training for a half marathon. And the first time I had to run 4 miles, I literally thought I was going to die. I was like, how can I finish this? How can I run 5 miles next week? And then I have to run 6 miles the week after that. Like this is, it's too overwhelming. And I was having a hard time dealing with it. And so what I did was I did a bunch of research. I talked to people that were doing this, that were successful at this. I did a lot of reading, like how do people get up and do this and stay motivated and all these things. And what I found was there's a typical pattern that people put effort before identity. You say, when I run a 5K, then I'm a real runner. But then you see half marathon runners and you're like, if I run a half marathon, then I'm a real runner. But what about those marathon runners? And so you see where this is going, right? The goalpost just keeps moving and moving, and you never can produce enough effort to appropriate that identity. But if you flip it on its head and you put identity before effort, the effort just sort of falls out. If you say, I am a runner, then what do runners do? They just run. And so when the weather is super shitty here in Michigan winters and it's icy and cold and snowy outside, you just get up and run because that's what runners do. And yes, there's like, you can't just flip that switch. There's a lot of things. And so Alex talked about some of these things, right? You have to create the context to sort of support that identity, right? So whether that's rituals or objects or communities, all these things that support that identity will help you then feel like you're there. And then the effort just sort of falls out from that. And then later on, I read James Clear's, Atomic Habits. And he sort of comes to a lot of the same conclusions. And one idea to sort of build new behaviors is to appropriate that identity first, and then sort of the behaviors just kind of follow after that. So I want to tell you a couple of stories then from, so that was me starting to run. I want to tell you a couple of stories from my experience running my first 100 miler, which was the Black Hills 100 almost 2 years ago in South Dakota. And it was essentially an out and back. So you run 50 miles on a trail to an aid station, and then you turn around and traverse that trail back 50 miles to the start finish line. And the weather was great, things were going well. We did have some hailstorms and things in the middle of the run, but I was feeling pretty good until I got to the turnaround point, about 12, 13 hours, I think. And then things started going south really quickly. I started throwing up. I hadn't stayed on top of my nutrition and hydration. I was vomiting. I was on the floor in a fetal position, shivering, and I was only halfway done. I was like, how can I finish this? How is this even possible? And so in the moment, I just knew I had to keep going. And I realized that my body was telling me I need to slow down. And I need to take that as a sign of what I need to do. And so later on, again, I read a book by Kelly McGonigal, Dr. Kelly McGonigal, who's The Upside of Stress. And she calls this the idea of taking a threat and turning it into a challenge. And all of these responses that your body have, stress responses, are your body telling you that it's getting prepared for this challenge. And so if you think of those bodily responses as resources for you to overcome a challenge, then it's much easier to move forward instead of thinking about these things as a threat and your body sort of being scared of them. So I composed myself, I got moving. It was slow going. About 15 miles later, my stomach sort of got a little better. This is the middle of the night at this point. And then my calf started just like, it hurt so bad I could hardly walk, let alone run. And so I was afraid if I ran too hard that it would just seize up and I'd have to stop altogether. And so I ended up finding a couple other people on the trail, and we sort of teamed up. And that's what you do in the sort of ultra runner community, is you team up and you help each other. It's not about competing necessarily, but it's about overcoming and getting through these experiences. And again, this is something that Kelly McGonigal calls attend and befriend response. So instead of, a lot of people have probably heard of fight or flight as a response to stress, but if you take the approach of helping others and connecting with other people, your body actually releases oxytocin. And oxytocin, even if you're still in a stress response, oxytocin heart while you're still in that stress response, if you can connect with other people and you can sort of join forces. So that's another, she calls this sort of the science of resilience. So it's another approach, right? When you're in a stressful situation, reach out to other people, connect with other people, do things for other people, and they can help you sort of together move through these tough times. So the last thing that I want to talk about is this idea of stories and storytelling. And we all tell ourselves stories about the situations that we're going through. And oftentimes in these races, people don't drop out. So you have, a lot of the races I've done have about a 50% finish rate. So 50% of the people that start the race don't finish. And a lot of times people that don't finish, it's because they mentally weren't prepared to get through it. They physically could keep going, but they've told themselves stories and have gotten in these sort of death spiral story loops where they think they can't do it. And so you have to convert these sort of death spirals of these negative stories into positive stories, right? I was in a lot of pain, but I was still moving forward. And so I had to focus on that fact of still moving forward and tell myself that story and focus on that story, and then I could keep going. And so this idea of telling yourself the stories and connecting to the why you're doing the thing that you're doing is super helpful. And using that sort of reinforcing loop to be positive instead of a negative spiral. So that's it, right? I mean, I think in summary, this idea of turning threats into challenges, instead of just fight or flight, focus on tend and befriend responses, and focus on telling yourself positive stories about what's happening and not focusing on the negative stories and the things that you can't control. So as we go through life, there's going to be unexpected things that happen that you're not prepared for, that you couldn't have been prepared for. But it's not about being prepared for these situations. It's about how do you respond to the situations when they happen. I had no idea when I was filming this that I was going to fall. It wasn't planned. It just happened, but you have to get up and keep going and keep moving forward. So with that, I'll leave you with a sort of typical saying in ultra running, which is you can do more than you think you can. And I think we all facing this global pandemic right now, I think we have to focus on that fact that we can do more than we think we can. So with that, I will finish.
Thank you, Erik. Fantastic.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you so much. First of all, I'm going to open questions now for Erik. And Erik, thank you for the beautiful nature scenery as well. I'm just glad that you were doing the run, so I don't have to. I guess my first question is actually from myself. When I was reading the article you wrote about it, I noticed that you described ultra running as, I don't want to mangle it, but something like a place of compassionate connections. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that goes to this idea of this idea of sort of tend and befriend, right? The ultra running community is not about competition, and that's why it feels so home to me, is that everyone is willing to stop in the middle of a race, stop and check on you. In my latest race, I was throwing up on the side of the trail, and runners didn't just go by. Everyone stopped. Everyone stopped, asked how you're doing, are you okay, can I get you anything? And they're there to help each other. And so this idea of sort of a compassionate community is what keeps that ultra running community going and moving forward.
Excellent. There's a question from a fellow runner. She says, you mentioned rituals as one of the elements to support the identity. Could you explain more about that, please?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I did when I first started running. Is I got all my gear out, my shorts and shoes and everything, and I put it by the side of my bed. So it was the last thing I saw before I went to sleep. It was the first thing I saw when I got up in the morning. When I was training, I also had a tangible schedule that was visible in the kitchen where I went every day, and I had a magnet on the day that it was. And so I had to physically move the magnet to the new day to see what my run was. And at that moment, I had to make a conscious choice. Am I going to run today or am I not going to run today? And by physically interacting with that thing, going through that ritual, it sort of pushed me to get out on runs even when I wasn't wanting to. And then there's lots of other things you can do. But those are some of the examples of some of the rituals I did when I was first starting.
I think one of the other things that stuck out for me in the article you wrote was there was a statistic you shared about the Navy SEALs, you know, these US Navy SEALs. And again, I think it was something about 40% of your effort, and I don't want to misspeak. Would you share that statistic?
Oh yeah, honestly, that's years ago. I'd have to go back and look to see what it was. But I can share the link to the article. I did this, it was a much longer talk for UX Week several years ago where I talked about this. So I'll share that in the chat in a bit.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna rephrase for what I think I remember. It was basically that like 40% of your actual effort is when most humans start like freaking out and thinking
I think that's about right.
They can't do it, right? So like, if you think about that, it's pretty astounding.
I will say one of the other things, just as a sort of self-promotion, if you will, but not really, when this came on and sort of everyone into stay-at-home orders, I opened up my calendar sort of as a tend and befriend response to do open office hours. And so I have 2 slots per day that people have been signing up for, and just to talk. Some of it's business, some of it's not, some of it's personal, some of it's just to make connections. So I'll put a link in the chat if people want to connect after this and sign up for office hours.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Erik. Fantastic talk. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Simona to introduce our final speaker.
Yeah, it's again, it's impossible not to mention how, without really planning the narrative around all these analogies with practice of being designers or like being a runner or actually experiencing COVID-19, give us a lot of, I would say, good energy ultimately about, you know, what some people have defined human solidarity. It's the idea that it seems like of course, there is no quick magic solution to the big crisis we're living, but definitely like human solidarity seems to be like the long-term strategy for things to improve at the political level, economic and social. And it's human solidarity doesn't mean to help each other in a sort of humanitarian way. It really means having a aligned action around an agreed and common destination or purpose. And the basis for this human solidarity is really about sharing stories and understanding that your story is similar to the one someone else is living, maybe still very different, but all in all, we all need to get to the same destination and the same purpose and the same goal. So it's quite fantastic to see how, coming from different perspectives, we're all like aligning on this idea that, yeah, ultimately it's about supporting each other, and we can learn from all the speeches we had today.